It was raining hard when a powerful millionaire CEO stepped out of his luxury car, but then he froze. Through the storm, a tiny barefoot girl carried her unconscious twin sister in her arms, begging for help. The clinic turned them away because they had no money, and in that moment, the ruthless billionaire faced a choice: walk away like always, or save the little girl's dying sister. What happened 6 minutes later made the entire city cry. Before we dive in, where are you watching me from right now and what's the time there? If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our family for more emotional stories. The night was drowning in rain. The city lights blurred into watery streaks, neon colors bleeding into endless puddles. Cars rushed past, spraying sheets of water onto the sidewalks. But one car slowed to a stop. A sleek black machine that spoke of wealth and authority. Its door opened with a soft mechanical click. Out stepped Michael Carter, the man who owned half the city. The man people feared, envied, and whispered about. His tailored suit was already soaked by the downpour. Raindrops slid down his sharp jawline. Blue eyes, cold as glass, scanned the street. To the world, Michael Carter was untouchable. A ruthless millionaire CEO. A man with ice in his veins. He had just closed another billion-dollar deal. A victory on paper, but not in his heart. For inside, there was only emptiness. He lit a cigarette. The flame flickered against the rain, only to die in seconds. Michael cursed under his breath. And then, he saw it. Movement through the storm. Not a car, not a man, but something small. Lightning flashed, and his heart stopped. A little girl, barely 7 years old, hair plastered to her face, golden strands heavy with rain. Her feet were bare, slapping against the flooded street, tiny steps fighting against the water rushing by. But in her arms, Michael saw her burden. Another child, her twin sister. Unconscious, pale, limp. The girl's head dangled against her shoulder, her body unmoving, her lips colorless. Michael froze. The cigarette slipped from his fingers. He couldn't breathe. Why did this hurt so much? Why did this sight pierce deeper than any boardroom battle? Why did that little girl's face remind him of someone? A memory clawed at him, one he had buried years ago. His sister. The night she slipped away from him. The night no amount of money could bring her back. The night he failed her. Rain pounded harder. The little girl stumbled. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her. Michael twitched forward, instinctively, but she pushed herself back up. Tighter grip, stronger hold. She would not let her sister fall. She would not let her sister die. Her lips moved, trembling. The words were drowned in the storm, but Michael knew them. Prayers, desperate, broken prayers. The city ignored her. Umbrellas tilted away, cars kept rushing by. No one cared, but Michael couldn't look away. His chest tightened. His heart beat violently. Something inside him screamed. She pressed forward, step after agonizing step, her little arms trembling, her body too small for the weight she carried, but her love gave her strength. Michael's eyes burned. He saw his sister again, the last time he held her, the last time he cried. The girl reached a broken streetlight. Its faint glow stretched her shadow impossibly long. One child carrying another. A haunting image etched into his mind. Her voice cracked as she sobbed. But she didn't stop. She wouldn't stop. And then, through the curtain of rain, Michael saw her destination. A clinic. The neon sign flickered. Faint, broken, almost lifeless itself. She shoved the door open with her shoulder. Her sister's body sliding dangerously. Her small arms trembling under the weight. And just like that, she vanished inside. Swallowed by the shadows of the building, Michael stood still. Rain pounded against him. Thunder rolled above. His mind said, "Walk away. This isn't your problem. You don't owe anyone anything." But his heart whispered another truth. If you leave now, you'll never forgive yourself. His hand lifted slowly. His eyes fixed on the clinic door, every part of him at war. Would Michael Carter follow her inside, or walk away like he always did? The clinic door creaked open under the weight of the storm. Fluorescent lights buzzed weakly above the empty waiting room. The air smelled of disinfectant and forgotten hope. Little Lily staggered forward, her wet hair clinging to her tiny face. Her knees hit the tiled floor in front of the reception desk. She held her sister tighter, her arms trembling from exhaustion. Her voice cracked with desperation. "Please, she's dying. Help my sister." The woman behind the desk didn't move. Her glasses slid down her nose as she glanced at the girls. Her expression was sharp, cold, almost mechanical. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "No payment, no treatment. That's the rule." The words sliced through the air like ice. Lily's chest heaved. She didn't understand money. She only understood that her twin was slipping away. "I'll pay later," she begged. "She's all I have. Please don't let her die." The receptionist shook her head slowly. Her lips pressed together in a line of indifference. Rules were rules, even if a child's life depended on them. At the doorway, Michael Carter stood frozen. Rain dripped from his hair onto the polished floor. His fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. His mind betrayed him with memories. That night, that hospital, that moment his own little sister's hand grew cold in his grasp. He had begged too. Begged for help that came too late. The pain came rushing back, sharper than the storm outside. And now, before his eyes, history was repeating. Another innocent child facing the same cruelty. Lily's sobs echoed through the sterile room. She pressed her face against Lucy's damp hair. "She's all I have." The words shattered Michael's defenses. He felt something break inside his chest. He could no longer stand still. With sudden force, his shoes struck the tiles. He stormed forward, the sound echoing like thunder in the clinic. Every head turned as he planted himself before the desk. "Enough," his voice boomed. It wasn't the tone of a businessman, it was the cry of a man haunted by loss. The receptionist blinked, startled. "Sir." "Put it on my account," Michael snapped. "I'll cover everything. Treat her, now." The authority in his voice was undeniable. Doctors peeked from behind the hallway. Nurses froze mid-step. The receptionist stammered, fumbling with her papers. "But Mr. Carter, this isn't protocol." Michael slammed his palm against the desk. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "Forget protocol. Do your job." The room fell silent. Even Lily stopped crying for a moment. Her wide blue eyes blinked up at the towering man. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "You'll help her?" Michael looked down. His gaze softened for the first time in years. "Yes, little one. I'll help her." The nurses rushed forward at his command. One gently lifted Lucy from Lily's arms. Another checked her pulse, frowning at its weakness. "Quickly," Michael urged. "She doesn't have time." The nurses disappeared into the hallway with Lucy. The sound of hurried footsteps faded behind swinging doors. The waiting room grew eerily quiet. Lily clutched Michael's sleeve, her tiny hand trembling against the fabric of his suit. Tears streaked down her cheeks. "Thank you, sir. Thank you for saving my sister." Michael swallowed hard. The gratitude of a child pierced deeper than any victory in his empire. For the first time in years his eyes burned. The storm raged outside. The clock ticked mercilessly on the wall. Every second felt heavier than gold. Would the doctors return with hope, or with heartbreak? Michael sat down slowly in the waiting chair. His powerful frame hunched forward. His hands pressed against his temples. This was no longer just about money. This was about redemption. About a chance to do what he couldn't do years ago. 6 minutes. That's all it might take to decide Lucy's fate. 6 minutes that could either heal old wounds, or tear them open again. The rain outside battered harder, as if the heavens themselves were waiting for the outcome. Michael's chest rose and fell with deep, uneven breaths. His empire was meaningless tonight. Only one thing mattered now. Would Lucy survive the night? Or was it already too late? The doors to the emergency ward slammed shut, sealing Lucy away from the world that desperately clung to her. The sound echoed in the narrow hallway, leaving behind a chilling stillness that even the rain outside couldn't soften. Michael stood stiff, his tailored suit now damp from the storm he'd just walked through, but he barely noticed. His eyes locked on the doors, as if staring hard enough could somehow keep the fragile little girl alive inside. Beside him, Lily trembled, her tiny hands gripping the fabric of his jacket like it was her last anchor. Her voice cracked as she whispered through sobs, "Don't let her die, sir. Please don't let her die." Michael's throat tightened. He was used to negotiations worth millions, to boardrooms where silence meant power, but this silence meant death or life. The clock above the reception desk ticked with cruel precision. Each second was louder than the last. 3 minutes had never felt this long. Michael clenched his jaw, remembering the hospital corridor from his past, the one where his own little sister had been taken away from him. He had been powerless then, a boy who couldn't save her. Now, years later, that same helplessness clawed at his chest, threatening to consume him. Lily pressed her wet cheek against his suit. "Sir, you're rich, right? Rich people can save people, can't they?" Her innocent question tore through his heart like glass. He wanted to tell her yes. He wanted to promise her the world. But he knew too well, money couldn't bargain with fate. 5 minutes crawled by. Lily's sobs softened into silent prayers, her lips moving without sound. She held on to Michael as if he were her father, as if he were the only one who could keep her from breaking. Michael's hand hesitated, then gently rested on her shoulder. The gesture startled him. He wasn't a man who touched others, not out of comfort. But with Lily, it felt natural, almost necessary. The doors remained loosed. Nurses rushed back and forth with trays of instruments, their expressions unreadable. No one gave answers. Every second was a cruel punishment. Michael's mind whispered old regrets. If only he had been stronger when his sister needed him. If only he had done something, anything. Maybe she'd still be alive. Now here he was again, standing outside another set of hospital doors, unable to control the outcome. 6 minutes had passed. The longest 6 minutes of his life. The hallway grew unbearably quiet. The ticking of the clock seemed to stop, though Michael knew it hadn't. Time itself felt like it was holding its breath. Finally, the doors creaked open. A doctor stepped out, his coat stained with hurried work, his face pale from exhaustion. Michael's chest rose sharply. Lily gasped and gripped his arm tighter. The child's blue eyes searched the doctor's face, desperate for a sign. But the man's expression gave nothing away. Not hope, not despair, just a heavy mask of silence. The doctor removed his glasses, wiping them slowly, as though buying time. Michael's heart hammered in his chest. "Say something, anything." Lily's tiny voice broke the air. "Doctor, did you save my sister?" The man looked down at her, his lips parting, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. Michael felt his stomach drop. Hope or heartbreak, everything balanced on the edge of that moment. The silence that followed was unbearable. Every soul in the hallway seemed to lean in, waiting for the answer that could shatter or heal. And then, the doctor drew in a deep breath, his face still unreadable. He opened his mouth. The next words would decide if Lily's world ended that night, or if a miracle had just begun. "She's alive." The doctor's words broke the suffocating silence like a crack of light in endless darkness. For a moment, neither Michael nor Lily moved. It was as if the world itself had paused, stunned by the weight of those two fragile words. Then Lily's knees buckled, and she collapsed forward, her tiny arms wrapping around Michael's waist as tears poured from her eyes. "You saved her," she sobbed, her voice trembling with relief. "You're an angel. You saved my sister." Michael froze, his body stiff under the sudden weight of her embrace. He wasn't used to this kind of touch, pure, desperate gratitude. He looked down at her golden hair plastered to her face, her shoulders shaking as though she had carried the universe alone. Something inside him cracked open. He had built walls higher than his skyscrapers, walls meant to shield him from weakness. But this child, this little girl had walked right through them. His lips parted, his voice no louder than a whisper. "No, little one, you saved her." His eyes burned, and for the first time in years, he let the sting of tears come. "You didn't give up. You kept carrying her, even when the world tried to turn its back." He turned his gaze to the sterile floor, but all he saw was another night, long ago. A night when a hospital bed held his little sister, her breaths shallow, her fingers cold. He remembered standing in the corner, paralyzed, wishing he had the courage to fight for her, to scream, to beg, to do anything. But he hadn't. Michael swallowed hard. Lily had shown more bravery at 7 than he had at 17. Her courage was the kind of strength that money could never buy, the kind of strength he wished he had possessed when it mattered most. The doctor cleared his throat softly. "She's weak," he explained. "Her pulse is faint, but she's stable for now. The next 24 hours are critical." Lily pulled away from Michael just enough to look at the doctor, her tear-stained face glowing with fragile hope. "Can I see her?" she asked. The doctor nodded gently, then glanced at Michael as though acknowledging the unspoken truth, that without him, this child's story would have ended in tragedy. Michael placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. "We'll go together," he said, his voice thick, surprising even himself. As they walked toward the ward, Michael's footsteps felt heavier, as though each one carried pieces of his broken past. He glanced at the fragile child beside him and realized she wasn't just walking toward her sister, she was leading him toward redemption. Inside the dimly lit room, Lucy lay on a narrow bed, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Machines beeped quietly, each sound like a fragile promise that life still clung to her. Lily rushed forward, clutching her sister's hand. "Lucy, it's me. It's Lily. I told you I'd never let go." Michael stood in the doorway, his breath caught in his throat. Watching Lily press her forehead against her sister's hand was like watching love itself take form. Raw, selfless, unshakable. He thought of his own sister again, her last breath slipping away while he stood frozen, powerless. A whisper escaped his lips, words he wished he could send back in time. "I'm sorry. I should have fought harder." But Lily's courage had done what he could not. It had pulled Lucy back from the edge. The mirror moment hit him like lightning. This little girl had shown him what true strength was, and in her eyes he saw the boy he once was, the boy who had failed. She had become the reminder he didn't know he needed. Michael stepped closer, the sound of his shoes quiet on the floor. "Your sister's alive because of you, Lily," he murmured. "Don't ever forget that." Lily looked up at him with wide, glistening eyes. "You really think so?" "I know so." His voice broke. "You carried her when no one else would. That's what love looks like." The child smiled faintly through her tears, the kind of smile that carried both relief and exhaustion. She leaned over and kissed Lucy's forehead, whispering, "Stay with me. Don't leave me." Michael turned his face away, afraid the tears gathering in his own eyes might finally fall. He pressed his fingers against his temple, but the ache in his chest wouldn't ease. The doctor slipped out quietly, leaving them in the quiet hum of machines. For the first time in years, Michael didn't feel like the CEO who ruled over empires. He felt like a man standing on the edge of something bigger than himself, something he couldn't quite name. But then, a question struck him, slicing through the fragile calm. Where was their mother? Why wasn't she here, holding her daughters, fighting for them? His brows furrowed. Had she abandoned them, or was something else keeping her away? Michael's gaze lingered on Lily, who still clutched her sister's hand like a lifeline. She had carried Lucy through the storm, begged strangers for help, and never gave up, all alone. The thought chilled him. He stepped back, his mind already racing with questions he didn't yet have answers to. Something wasn't right. And as the night deepened, one truth pressed heavier against his chest than any deal he had ever closed. The twins' story was far from over. What had happened to Grace Parker, the mother who wasn't there when her children needed her most? The corridor lights flickered faintly, the scent of disinfectant lingering heavy in the air. Hours had passed since the chaos of the stormy night, but the weight of uncertainty still pressed on every heartbeat. The glass doors of the hospital swung open with a violent push. Grace Parker stumbled inside, rain dripping from her uniform, strands of hair plastered against her face. Her chest rose and fell in uneven bursts as she scanned the room with wild eyes. Lucy, Lily? Her voice cracked, a mother's desperation echoing through the quiet. Oh God, what happened to my babies? Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her mouth, her entire body shaking with the terror of not knowing if she was too late. And then her gaze froze. Standing near the ward door was a man whose presence filled the hallway like thunder. Michael Carter. The name itself felt impossible in her world, a world of bills and hunger and endless night shifts. Yet here he was, flesh and blood, staring at her with an unreadable expression. Grace faltered, her knees nearly giving way. What could a man like him possibly be doing here, next to her daughters? Her breath caught as she stepped forward, her voice dropping into a whisper. Are they alive? Michael didn't answer immediately. His piercing blue eyes studied her, searching for something beneath the exhaustion on her face. Finally, he gave a slow nod. They're alive, for now. Grace pressed her palms together, relief flooding her. Tears sprang to her eyes, falling as quickly as the rain still pounding against the hospital windows. She whispered a shaky prayer, clutching her chest as though she needed to hold her heart in place. Then, shame washed over her. She lowered her head, her voice breaking under the weight of confession. I had no money. I thought if I worked harder, saved faster, maybe I could afford treatment before it was too late. Her uniform bore the marks of her struggle, stains from endless shifts, fabric worn thin from years of sacrifice. Every thread seemed to tell a story of nights she had chosen hunger so her children could eat, mornings she had walked miles to work because she couldn't afford the bus. Michael's jaw tightened. This woman didn't look weak. She looked like someone the world had tried to break again and again, yet here she stood, still fighting. He remembered the countless people he had crushed in business deals, the families destroyed by his hunger for power. He had always told himself it was just business, but seeing Grace, fragile yet unbowed in her love, he wondered for the first time if he had been wrong all along. Grace dared a glance at him, her voice trembling. You must think I'm a terrible mother, leaving them like that, letting Lily carry her sister all alone. Her shoulders shook as she tried to hold back sobs. I was at work. I didn't even know. My little girl had to be braver than I ever was. Michael took a slow step toward her, his presence overwhelming yet strangely protective. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he simply watched the tears run down her face, the guilt etched into every line of her expression. In her pain, he saw something that mirrored his own, the regret of not being there. The burden of believing you failed the ones you loved most. Grace wiped at her eyes, though it did little to hide her shame. You've done more for my daughters in one night than I have in years. Her voice broke. I can never repay you. Michael's chest tightened, a strange ache spreading in a place he had long thought hollow. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. That love measured in sacrifice was worth more than every dollar in his bank. But the words stuck in his throat. He had lived his whole life believing money was the only power that mattered. And yet here was a mother who had given everything, except wealth, and somehow, her love still shone brighter than anything he had ever bought. For the first time in decades, Michael didn't feel like a man who owned the world. He felt like a man who had just been taught what real strength looked like. Grace bowed her head again, her voice so soft it almost disappeared. Will you walk away now, sir? You've paid the bills. You owe us nothing. The weight of her words hung in the air, pressing against Michael's chest. She expected him to leave, to disappear back into the unreachable world he came from, but his feet refused to move. Something inside him whispered that his debt wasn't just to the hospital. It was to the little girl who had carried her sister through the storm. It was to the sister he had once lost and never forgiven himself for. It was to the woman before him, who had fought life with nothing but her hands and her heart. The silence stretched, heavy and unbroken. Grace finally looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. For a heartbeat, she saw not the ruthless CEO the world feared, but a CSM, man caught between walking away and stepping into something he didn't yet understand. And in that suspended moment, everything hung in the balance. Would Michael Carter return to the cold world he knew, or stay and let this fragile family change him forever? Michael sat in the sterile waiting room, the harsh hum of fluorescent lights above doing nothing to quiet the storm inside him. His reflection stared back at him from the glass window, sharp features softened by the tiredness in his eyes. For a man who owned entire skyscrapers, he had never felt smaller. What was he doing here? This wasn't his world. He belonged in boardrooms and penthouses, not hospital corridors where love and loss lingered in the air like smoke. He pressed his hands together, elbows on his knees, trying to steady the racing of his heart. His empire had been built on control, on never letting feelings interfere with logic. But tonight, logic had no place. The echo of Lily's sobs still rang in his ears, the sight of her frail arms carrying her sister haunting him. And beneath it all, the shadow of his own sister's last breath whispered to him, as if reminding him of the boy who had once failed. He was about to rise, to leave, to step back into the world where money insulated him from pain, when a soft sound broke through the silence. "Sir!" He looked up. Lily stood before him, her golden hair damp, her eyes red from crying, but her spirit shining with the same quiet courage that had carried her through the storm. She hesitated, twisting her small hands together, then whispered, "Will you stay until my sister wakes up?" Michael blinked, caught off guard. Her words were not a demand, not even a plea. They were a child's fragile hope, wrapped in innocence and trust. She stepped closer, her voice breaking with sincerity. "She'll want to see you, the man who saved her." The words cut deeper than any accusation ever had. In the eyes of this little girl, he was not a ruthless CEO. He was something more. Something he had never been before, needed. Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight. He searched for an excuse, a reason to escape, but none came. Instead, the weight of her request pressed against him, heavier than any contract he had ever signed. He nodded slowly, almost reluctantly. "Yes, I'll stay." Lily's face lit with a fragile smile, and in that instant, something inside him shifted. The simple trust of a child had undone walls he had spent decades building. As she sat beside him, swinging her legs just above the floor, Michael found himself studying her in silence. How had this child endured so much and still carried hope in her eyes? Where had she found the strength he had always lacked? His chest tightened as realization settled in. For the first time in his life, all his money, all his power, felt meaningless. Because here, in this small hospital waiting room, he understood a truth that shook him. He had everything, yet it all felt empty, and unless he stayed, unless he remained with them, he feared he truly had nothing. Grace's tired voice drifted from the corridor, speaking with the doctor, heavy with worry. Michael glanced toward the sound, then back at Lily. He felt the pull of two worlds. One demanded he return to his empire, to the cold comfort of wealth. The other, this fragile family, offered no guarantees, only raw humanity, and for reasons he couldn't explain, his heart leaned toward the latter. He leaned back in the stiff chair, exhaling slowly. The silence stretched between him and Lily, but it was no longer empty. It was the silence of something unspoken. Connection. Michael stared again at his reflection in the glass. But this time, he didn't see the untouchable CEO the world feared. He saw a man caught between who he had been and who he might become. And as the storm outside finally began to quiet, so did something within him. Why did a man who had conquered the world suddenly feel as though he was only beginning to understand life, in the company of a little girl and her fragile sister? Lucy's eyelids fluttered open, heavy as though they had been carrying the weight of the world. Her lips parted, her voice barely audible. "Lily, where are you?" Lily bolted forward, almost tumbling off the chair beside the bed, her tiny hands clutching her sister's. "I'm here, Lucy, I'm right here." Tears slipped down Lucy's pale cheeks as she tried to smile. Her fragile arms wrapped weakly around Lily, holding her as if afraid the moment would vanish if she let go. Michael stood a few steps away, frozen in place. His chest tightened at the sight, an unfamiliar ache spreading through him. The beeping of machines, the smell of disinfectant, the quiet sobs of relief, all of it pressed on his heart harder than any boardroom pressure ever had. In the corner, Grace couldn't hold herself upright. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers, sobbing silently as she watched her daughters cling to each other. She wanted to run to them, to embrace them both, but shame held her back like chains. Lucy's weak gaze shifted. Her eyes landed on Michael. Confusion flickered across her pale face, as though she was trying to understand why a stranger stood there in their most intimate moment. Lily, with the innocence only a child could hold, looked up at Michael with shining eyes. Her words came out soft but steady. "You're like the dad we never had." The sentence sliced through the air. Michael's throat tightened. His chest caved in as though all the armor he had built over decades had shattered in an instant. Grace gasped, her tears spilling faster. "Lily?" she whispered, embarrassed, but unable to scold the child for speaking the truth of her heart. Michael looked down at the floor, struggling to breathe. He had heard many titles in his life: CEO, billionaire, visionary, ruthless, but never dad, and now Froir. On the lips of a little girl who barely knew him, the word lodged itself deep inside him, pulling at wounds he thought were long scarred. He remembered his sister. The night she had begged him not to leave her side, and he had walked away to chase ambition. Her last breath had haunted him since, but Lily's trust, Lucy's fragile gratitude, Grace's quiet suffering, it was as if life itself was offering him another chance. He stepped closer to the bed, slowly, as if afraid he might break the fragile air surrounding them. Lucy's hand slipped from Lily's and reached toward him, small and trembling. Without thinking, he took it. Her fingers were cold, her grip weak, but in that moment, it felt like the most sacred bond he had ever known. Grace finally moved, unable to bear the weight of silence. "You don't owe us anything, Mr. Carter," she whispered hoarsely. "You've already done more than anyone else would." Her eyes dropped to the floor, ashamed of her poverty, of her helplessness. She expected him to nod, to walk away, to return to his empire and forget they ever existed. But Michael couldn't. He stood there, torn between two worlds, the cold steel of boardrooms and the fragile warmth of a hospital room where love clung desperately to life. Lily climbed onto the bed carefully, curling beside her sister. "Please stay," she whispered again, her eyes locked on his. "She'll sleep better if she knows you're here." The request pierced deeper than any contract ever could. Michael's lips parted, but no words came. He felt Grace watching him, torn between gratitude and fear. Would he stay? Would he risk his carefully protected heart for two little girls who saw him not as a billionaire, but as a man who mattered? Lucy's breathing steadied, her fragile chest rising and falling with effort. Her small hand remained in his, clinging, trusting. Michael sat down beside the bed, unable to step back anymore. He whispered almost to himself, but loud enough for Grace to hear. "I don't know how to be what they see in me, but I'll try." Grace's knees buckled at his words. She leaned against the wall, overwhelmed. This man, this stranger, had no reason to care. And yet, he did. The room grew quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the monitors and the soft breaths of the sisters holding on to each other. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Not power, not control, but belonging. And then came the question that would haunt him through the night. Would he risk his heart to become their protector, or retreat back into the safety of his empire? The choice lingered like a storm at the edge of his soul. The first light of dawn crept gently across the hospital window, painting soft streaks of gold against the pale walls. Michael Carter had not closed his eyes all night. The storm had passed, yet something heavier than rain still lingered in his chest. He sat in the quiet waiting room, staring at the fragile girls who now slept peacefully. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about contracts, deals, or profits. He was thinking about a promise he hadn't yet spoken, but already knew he would make. When the doctor came with the papers, Michael didn't hesitate. Every bill, every single cost, he signed away as though it meant nothing. But to Grace, Lily, and Lucy, it meant everything. The burden she had carried for years suddenly lifted. Her trembling hands reached for the papers, but Michael gently stopped her. Grace whispered, her voice breaking, "Sir, I can't let you do this." We could never repay you." Michael's gaze softened, and for the first time in decades, his words carried warmth instead of steel. "You already did, Grace," he said quietly. "You reminded me what it means to be human." Grace's eyes flooded with tears. She wasn't looking at the millionaire on the magazine covers. She wasn't looking at the ruthless tycoon known for crushing rivals. She was looking at a man rediscovered, ring the heart he thought he had lost. In that moment, Lily stirred awake. Her small blue eyes blinked toward him. She reached for his hand without hesitation, as though she already knew he belonged. "There. Did you stay, sir?" she whispered. Michael nodded, his throat tight. "I told you I would." Lucy shifted beside her sister, weak but alive. When she saw Michael, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You're the man Lily told me about. The man who saved me." Michael shook his head gently. "No, little one, you saved me." The room fell into silence. Not the heavy silence of fear or grief, but a silence filled with unspoken gratitude. Grace pressed her hand over her heart, as though steadying the pieces of her broken world now being pieced back together. Michael looked at the three of them. The mother who had fought against impossible odds, the twin who carried her sister through the storm, the fragile child who clung to life with everything she had. He realized his empire had built walls around him, but these three had torn them down with nothing but love and courage. He stood, clearing his throat. "There will be schooling for the girls," he said firmly. "They'll never have to choose between learning and surviving again." Grace gasped, covering her mouth. "Mr. Carter, this is too much." But Michael raised a hand, stopping her protest. "It's not charity, it's an investment. In a future brighter than mine ever was." Lily jumped from her chair and wrapped her small arms around his waist. "You mean we'll get to go to school, like the other kids?" Michael knelt down, meeting her eyes. "Better than that, Lily. You'll get to dream." Lucy, still weak, whispered from the bed. "And you'll come to see us, right?" The question pierced through him like sunlight breaking clouds. He swallowed hard, fighting the ache in his chest. "Every chance I get," he promised. Grace's tears finally spilled as she turned away, ashamed of her trembling. But Michael touched her shoulder gently. "Don't carry this alone anymore," he said. "You've carried enough." Her voice cracked as, he answered. "You don't even know us. Why would you do all this?" Michael paused, his gaze distant, as though looking back into a past only he could see. "Because once, someone I loved needed help. And no one came. I swore I would never let that happen again." Grace stared at him, speechless. The cold-hearted CEO, the man headlines painted as merciless, was now standing before her with tears in his eyes. By morning, the paperwork was done. The girls were settled, the medical staff reassured, and Grace no longer faced the crushing weight of bills she could never pay. As Michael walked out of the clinic, the air felt different. The storm had washed the city clean, and so it seemed, had washed something clean within him too. He no longer felt like a man defined by money or power. For the first time, he felt like a man defined by choice, and he had chosen love. The chauffeur opened the car door, waiting for him to climb into the sleek black vehicle. But Michael hesitated. He turned back to glance at the clinic window. Inside, Lily was waving at him with both hands, Lucy smiling faintly from her bed. Grace stood behind them, her eyes filled with gratitude and hope. Michael's chest tightened, but this time it wasn't emptiness. It was fullness. It was belonging. It was family. He whispered to himself. 6 minutes. That's all it took. 6 minutes to remind him what it meant to feel. 6 minutes to turn strangers into the closest thing to home he had ever known. 6 minutes to change a man's life forever. From that night on, Michael Carter was no longer just a millionaire CEO. He was no longer a man walking through life alone. He had become something far greater. A guardian angel to 2 little girls. A quiet pillar of strength to a mother who had known only struggle, and a man reborn from the ashes of loneliness. The city continued to buzz and roar as though nothing had changed. But inside Michael's heart, everything had. The empire he had built still stood tall. But now, he finally had a reason to return home. A reason to wake each day not just richer, but fuller. Because wealth without love is emptiness, and love had finally found him in the rain. And yes, 6 minutes had changed everything.